Great. Well, good afternoon and welcome to this panel right after lunch. Always a tough thing to go after lunch. But really delighted to be here and having a conversation on the topic of geopolitics and the geoeconomics of the energy and climate issues facing the world. Lawrence Jones, Vice President, International Program here at EEI. And delighted to have an excellent panel here today. To my right here is Giacomo Donnini from Italy. Welcome. And then next to him is Ruth Forbes, who's the CEO of Fortis TCI. Next to Ruth is Ian McLeod. And by the way, I think Ian should get the applaud because he came the furthest, all the way from Australia to come here for this panel. So Ian, you get an applaud and welcome. Give him an applaud. I mean, he came all the way. And of course, Laszlo, he was the president of operations with Black & Veatch, Laszlo von Lazar. So welcome. So we're going to have a very interesting conversation. Obviously, we all know what's happening in the world. We started first with the pandemic, and that then followed up by a whole range of geopolitical as well as geoeconomical issues facing the industry, facing the energy sector around the world. And so we're going to have a discussion today to get different perspectives as to what does all of this mean for the energy sector. We know that the Russian invasion of Ukraine has created a lot of geopolitical issues, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We also understand that electricity markets around the world are going through all kinds of challenges. We know in Australia, for example, they shut down their wholesale market, and why they've done that is something we'll certainly hear about. But then we also have the small island nations like Turks Caicos and other island states. Their challenges are very different. And I think being able to couple these different geographical differences, but also there are some common themes. And then also understanding the whole issue around supply chain as it links to how we can sort of speed up the energy transition, how we even go about doing it. And so Laszlo will be able to share some thoughts there. We're going to do this sort of 3 rounds of questions and really asking the panelists to each take about 2 minutes to sort of give the response. We want this to be very rapid fire kind of conversation, and then we'll have hopefully time to get questions from the audience. And so let's go ahead and start by asking each of you, starting with you, Donnini, to just briefly tell us about Terna and what you do, and also what keeps you awake at night.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot and for the opportunity to speak here. Terna is the transmission system operator in Italy, which means that we are both the system operator and the asset owner. This is an approach which is widely applied in Europe. Most of the European Union countries have followed this type of approach, which is different from what we see here, for example. We are the asset owner, and we are the developing for the new transmission investments. We have a very strong investment plan. If you look at our 10-year national development plan, it's over 18 billion euros of investments. And personally, I'm responsible for international activities and development and the big projects in Italy, which are covering, the significant part of the 18 billions.
Good.
And if you ask me what keeps me awake at night, I think that, we are living in a transition period. Transition is always a moment where you have volatility, you have turbulence. What we have seen in the last couple of years is even worse than what is normally expected with the COVID-19 impact and then the war in Ukraine. But what is really important that we are able to go ahead, go straight, considering the policies and the targets we have, and being able to manage all this turbulence with flexibility and the ability to take decisions very quickly.
Good. We'll come back to talking a little bit about Terna, given the interconnections you have across Europe. Ruth, over to you. Tell us about Fortis TCI and what keeps you awake at night.
Thank you, Dr. Lawrence. Thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. I look forward to the exciting discussions with my fellow panelists. As you would have mentioned, I am from the Turks and Caicos Islands. Fortis TCI is the energy provider providing 98% of energy to the Turks and Caicos Islands. We have a vertically integrated utility system. We are approximately 16,500 customers, and we have an installed capacity about 92 megs virtually, which is virtually supplied via diesel. In the Turks and Caicos Islands, we are also heavily reliant on tourism. We're a highly tourism-based economy. So that comes with its own set of challenges, being solely reliant on one particular industry. In terms of what keeps me awake at night, it is the continued resiliency of the energy system. Particularly around this time, it's hurricane season, so that is something that we are always acutely conscious of. We are also in the transition process like everyone else. So how do we transition to more cleaner sources of energy? It's also a key factor for us in ensuring that we have the supporting policies and regulation in place to support a sensible transition. So basically the energy transition process, the speed of it and the extent to which we have the necessary support being a small island nation.
Thanks. Ian, over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, because I know you're doing a lot of stuff. By the way, Ian is also a global ambassador for EEI based in the Asia Pacific, so he wears multiple hats, but today he's wearing a non-EEI hat. So
yeah, Lawrence told me that I got no sort of protection with that role anywhere that I go. I thought I'd get a car with some flags, police escort, but none of that happened. So yeah, I do wear a few hats, and that's one of them. The main one is NZen Australia, which is owned by an Indian company. It's a global energy solutions company that's focused on energy, water and the environment. And in doing that, we focus on business advisory, transformation and digital solutions. My background was I ran Ergon Energy Corp for about 9 years, so the largest regional utility in Australia. So that gives a bit of foundation when we look at fixing problems. NZen itself is global. It's about 4,500 people based in India, UK, Turkey, Australia and a few other places, Spain. What keeps me up at night? Well, I worry about the customers and what's going to happen in this current environment. I worry about adaptation, and people talk a lot about the energy side of adaptation and orderly transformations, and then the climate stuff sort of comes on the side. I don't see a lot of effort being put into the climate side in Australia. The carbon contribution of the Black Summer of bushfires a couple of years ago, before we hit the pandemic and then had the floods. We have a song about that in Australia, by the way. It's all in our national anthem. You know, floods, rain, drought. We have it all. But all these things are interrelated. And if you don't manage those, it'll either be the energy costs and the security of the energy that's going to push up prices. It will be the lack of security in the system itself and the ability to host renewables that will become a problem. And who pays for that at the end of the day is the customer. So I actually think we've got to have a more systems approach to some of these things. We're in a technology-based world. The market's not the answer to everything.
Okay, we'll come back to talk about some of the specificity of what you're working on. Laszlo, over to you.
So I'm with Black & Veatch. It's a EPC company, so engineering, procurement, construction. We're about 10,000 people. We work throughout the world. Our focus areas are energy, utilities, oil and gas, water, and government work as well. And major areas of work are the Americas, Asia, and Europe. And what I'd say is that we're a traditional EPC company with, we're very strong, and what makes us unique is our engineering and our engineering capabilities. I hope to talk about what we're doing in hydrogen and other projects. And then I'd say what keeps me awake at night, and it does, but it's a little bit different, but it's the safety and security of the people in our company, our customers' companies, and our suppliers. The safety is always the biggest and number one concern. It's an issue of quality, but I think it's kind of unique when you think about the world and what's happening. It's not just physical safety, but it's mental safety and the mental health of all of us, because we've gone through a pandemic, we've gone through major supply disruptions and impacts to the markets, and we're in the middle of a war, and a very scary war. And all these things, and all of us, we work in teams, we're part of teams that work together, and you gotta make sure that the people who are on your team are dealing with it, and you don't always know that. So we're focused on physical safety, but I'm increasingly concerned about the mental safety of all of us.
Thanks. So Giacomo, let's start with you, and I want to talk about, obviously, transmission, but just give us a quick update on the state of play in Europe when it comes to this whole issue around energy. I mean, I know there are different perspectives, but what's your take on what's happening that we should be aware of, both in terms of oil and gas, LNG, nuclear, coal? Can you just give us a quick synopsis of where things stand right now? And then you can come back and talk about transmission.
Well, I think the first thing is to understand which is the background. I mean, in Europe, starting from 2019, the different countries has set a specific target for decarbonization. So there was in 2019 the National Energy and Climate Plans, which has then been updated with the Fit for 55, which is a more aggressive way to reach decarbonization. The idea was that there could be first the shutdown of coal power plants, and with gas replacing that power until renewables could have reached a certain level in order to be the massive power generation. What happened recently? Well, we also have to consider what happened during the lockdown due to COVID-19 restrictions. You know that in some of the European countries and in Italy in particular, we had a very hard lockdown where consumptions dropped dramatically due to the fact that no one was going to work and factories were closed. And at the same time, we had very nice weather. So we are all obliged to stay at home, and outside was a very nice spring. But this means having a lot of PV generation. So that was an important experience because people experience what it means to have a very huge part of the consumptions covered by renewables. There were days where in all the center, south, and main islands of Italy, we were in overgeneration, which means that renewable generation was higher than consumptions. And this drives one of the points that is, the price of energy was zero. So people start to think if the market of energy still makes sense when we will be in that situation, where renewables covering over the 80% of the consumptions. And second was the need for the grid, but this is something we'll discuss later. Then what happened is, with a sharp recovery of economy, we had a strong increase of gas prices, and this even before the war. The war just, make it worse, but we had that. And then there was still, people were starting to rethink about the use of gas. Because if you look at the forecast was that there would be an increase of gas in the short period of, or let's say short to mid-term in the next 5 years before having, this big increase of renewables. And now with the situation that we have due to the war and Russia, which has started to reduce export of gas to Europe, the main decision has been, in the short term, they are obviously looking at using coal because that's, a very short-term opportunity we have. Then to diversify sources of natural gas, which means to have stronger relationship with Northern Africa countries like Algeria or Libya, which are already connected with pipelines to Italy. To increase the source of natural gas from LNG. For sure, there are some countries like Spain who already have terminals and can accept a lot of LNG. Italy and Germany, for sure, had to do investments and very quick in that. But long term, the idea is to go ahead with renewables that will allow Europe in general to be more independent from an energy point of view, and also will allow to stabilize prices. So long term, it's confirmed the idea to go and have foster a very huge amount of renewables, which at the end would require certain number of other investments, starting from grid infrastructures, that storage, for example, is another important piece. Otherwise, we will not be able to manage and integrate all these renewables.
Just before you talk briefly about transmission, so natural gas, LNG from the US has been part of the conversation, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, and in terms of nuclear, I know we talked about it briefly, there really isn't any clarity yet in terms of nuclear from the Germans?
Yeah.
What's the situation?
No, that's the situation. I mean, you know that in the past years, after Fukushima events, Germany decided to find a way to shut down all the nuclear power plants. And there was France, which inside the European Union is the, let's say, most nuclear country, considering they have 54 reactors operating now, which, by the way, are reaching the end of life. So there's been a lot of discussions on this. At the moment, no decision has been taken because there are different positions.
Okay. Just quickly on transmission then. What impact does all of this mean for transmission infrastructure and building new infrastructure in Europe, but also in Italy?
The grid infrastructure is key if you want to, let's say, to really to have the energy transition really happen. If you want to integrate renewables, you need to have the possibility to transfer energy from where it is produced to where it is consumed. If you look at Italy, for example, most of the energy resources in terms of wind and sun are in the center, the south, and the big islands, and you need to ship all this energy to the northern part of Italy, where you have approximately 2/3 of the total consumptions. And then it's also important to have the possibility to have to transfer this capacity to other countries. You know that in Europe we have the Mediterranean countries who have availability of sun, so PV will be extremely important, while northern countries have invested a lot and still investing in offshore wind and North Sea. So there are moments when you have excess of capacity of energy production in the North Sea, and you can ship it to maybe the southern countries, or in other moments it will be the opposite. If you do not have wind or strong wind in the north, in Germany, you can leverage on an important PV generation coming from the south. So it's extremely important that we have this possibility to transfer energy. So grid infrastructure is really a key habilitating factor for the energy transition. The other important point is about the the electricity consumption, and the fact that for many applications, the energy transition requires the switch from other sources of energy to electricity. Just think about electric vehicles, but also heating for houses. In Italy, we mainly use gas, and in other European countries, and we are supposed to move to electricity. This means that you need much more power in the big cities, and at the end, this requires that you fit with high voltage lines and point interconnections with a distribution grid so that they can provide all this additional energy. And if you want to do this type of investment, you need to use different technologies, because you have to go inside of the cities, and no one will allow you to build overhead lines. You need undergrounding. So investment in the transmission grid are really key in order to support energy transition.
Excellent. The second round, we'll talk about some of the barriers in terms of permitting and siting, because that's an issue facing a lot of countries. Ruth, let's talk about Turks Caicos. How has the geopolitics and the geoeconomics affected not just your island, but some of the other Caribbean countries? Just talk a little bit about some of the challenges you guys are facing.
Thank you again, Dr. Lawrence. The Caribbean islands, the region, has been impacted severely by the geopolitical and geoeconomic landscape. And just to put things into context, the Caribbean region virtually imports the majority of resources that are needed, for the exception of a few Caribbean countries who have natural resources available to them. And Turks and Caicos in particular, we virtually import everything. Everything is imported there. So that self-sustainability factor is not there. So when you put that into the context of the geopolitical landscape, it presents a higher level of challenge for us, being separated by those issues. So we are indeed seeing the impacts of the higher inflation, the inflationary prices, the higher fuel prices, the volatility in the fuel markets are also significantly impacting us. And we, frankly, are at the mercies of the larger countries who have access to those resources and who also is self-sufficient. So we are essentially at the mercies of other territories. So what we are ramping up in terms of the region, we are ramping up conversation to garner more support for these areas, for the climate challenges. We're garnering more support in that area from the international community. We are also seeing how we can strategically position the Caribbean as a player in the global space. Though small as one country, but if we come together, we can have some strategic advantage. So we as a region, we're also looking at those conversations. There's more internal conversation on how do we function as a unit as opposed to individual countries. So these are some of the sentiments that have been expressed locally as well as regionally.
We'll come back and talk about some of the regulatory and policy challenges I think you all are facing. Ian, let's talk about Australia, right? My favorite country, or one of my favorite countries.
New Zealand was.
The electricity market was shut down, at least the wholesale part of the market, last week. Talk about what's happening and you know, why are we headed in that direction in Australia when you have all the natural resources one would need? So give us an update.
I was hoping you'd answer that. Yeah, absolutely. It's been an interesting time in Australia with the market being suspended, and what that means is the wholesale price of energy has been at such a high level over a 7-day period that the Australian Energy Market Operator has intervened and put a cap on. That in itself caused some troubles because once the cap went on, some generators pulled supply off, waiting for AEMO, the market operator, to ask them back in again, because then that triggers a compensation trigger. So why do we have this event at the moment? Some people would say that it's a perfect storm, and it is being presented as a perfect storm. I guess the question I've got in my mind is whether it's now the norm, because, as I said before, the adaptation issues that we're facing and the climate issues we've seen in recent times are having a significant impact. So what we had was significant demand. We had an early winter or early cold snap, which therefore created demand across the network. If you've been watching Australia, we've gone from bushfires to pandemic like everyone else, and now into floods across New South Wales and Queensland. So those who don't know, Australia is the flattest, driest continent in the world. Technically Antarctica is supposed to be the driest or something, I understand, but in terms of falling rain, we're very dry. We don't have a lot of hydro resource. We've got a lot of resources for nuclear, but we don't use it ourselves. We send it overseas. So we have no nuclear generation, so we're fairly dependent on coal, black and brown coal. The floods in Queensland and New South Wales flooded some of the pits, therefore the production of coal became an issue. The other thing is, does anyone, you probably don't know our Prime Ministers, but Kevin Rudd in 2017 when he came in, or 2007, Rudd 2007, there hasn't been a generator built since then, a coal-fired gas-fired generators. So the generators are quite old, and therefore they are becoming very unreliable. They require more maintenance, and all of a sudden you've got this demand spike. You've got generators down for maintenance, generators that are broken down, and they're interfacing with a renewable portfolio out there. Some people say that Australia's not sort of carrying its weight on renewables. I was saying to Lawrence the other night, on a per capita basis, Australia's got the highest investment in renewables in the world. When I was running Ergon, we were getting up to 30% to 40% in some of our regional towns on rooftop solar. So Australia's also got the highest penetration of rooftop solar in the world. So it is transitioning, and but when you get into these situations where you've got peak demand, lack of resources, ageing fleet, supply issues with gas, obviously that became a big issue. So Australia is either the first or second biggest gas exporter in the world. But we don't reserve for our local market on the East Coast. We do on the West Coast, but for the national electricity market, we don't. And therefore, gas prices went through the roof. So when the regulator intervened, as I said, some generators decided there's being a review done now. Some may have pulled out their generation capacity so that they would be requested to come back in and be compensated. They're arguing they can't make a profit at $300 a meg at this point in time. They're losing dollars, and that's what the intervention was about.
Interesting. We'll come back and talk a little bit about some of the solutions that you see as at least going forward. Let's talk about Black & Veatch. Talk about some of the challenges you guys have seen as a result of some of these geopolitical issues.
So I think the first challenge is actually an internal one. And, we're very, as Doris Kearns said last night, as Americans and an American EPC company, we tend to be internally focused. And when you think about COVID and the supply chain disruptions and inflation, a lot of that is externally driven. And we as a company and I think as a country need to be thinking about that and how it impacts how we work. And a couple of examples are, we were going down, this was over a year ago, we were going down the path of, we're a large solar EPC, and we were going down the path of some projects and started asking, well, what's going on with the pricing here? How can these projects that we're developing still work? And the team was, we came up with the price a couple months ago, right? Back in December. It's gonna work, and let's take a look at it. And the real issue was, we couldn't, the project for us wouldn't work. And we went to our client and said the project's not gonna work. And really what we needed was better transparency. And that's what's happening now. We're working with our clients right up front saying, here, this is what the numbers are. And honestly, with our clients and our suppliers, it works both ways. There has to be a lot more transparency about what the numbers are, because you have to know when the point that the project just doesn't work, right? You just have to know it, and you have to be honest about it. And so I think it's driven, you need global acumen. You need it in the organization, you need it in everybody, and you need transparency next to it. And so, and I'll be honest, our resources are constrained, and the people who aren't taking account to what's happening and saying, no, you have to provide a bid that's 6 months where you're committing to the price. So I have suppliers that are saying, I can't tell you the price until I deliver the equipment to you. So with customers who aren't moving, they're going to end up, and us too, who aren't addressing it, it's going to be a lot harder for them to do the projects they want. And really the most important is really have transparency, good communication, and a sense of urgency around it.
Interesting. Giacomo, let's talk a little bit about, Laszlo talked about the challenges, the EPCs. You build a lot of transmission around the world. And so talk a little bit about the economics of building transmission now, but then just briefly mention a little bit about the issue around siting and permitting, which I know is a big issue in many countries, including the US. How are you guys dealing with that in Europe with all these transmission lines being built?
Well, you're right. I mean, if you look at the traditional, let's say, experience we have, is that we need like 10 years in order to complete the permitting process, and maybe 2 or 3 years to build the line, if it's an overhead line. So it's too long. I mean, what we have tried to do is, well, for sure, the government and recent government has introduced some, let's say, improvements in legislation which can help, and we think can in particular help in the future. But on the other side, we are develop a way to present the projects at the local level, try to have a consultation phase where, after the first feasibility study, we present the importance and the benefit that the project can deliver, and we try to explain our view of the projects, which are the solutions that we have identified, and gather from the local communities, which are suggestions or issues that they see, and try to really find a way to manage this, which means sometimes using more undergrounding, both for AC or DC installations, trying to have, every time that we have an impact on a specific area, trying to see if we can cancel some of the existing lines, so that the net impact can be better and more acceptable. In general, we're always spending a lot of time in trying to explain it to explain our projects to the local communities. Then we have all the let's say the leverage on technologies that can really help in having let's say a neutral, if possible, or minimal impact on the landscape. Just to give you an idea, we have for undersea cables. So we are now experiencing some problems with the Posidonia, which is a seaweed that you will find often in the Mediterranean Sea, close to the coast. And if you have to lay the cable on it, so we have identified a way and a technology that allows to make a very short trench, put the cable, and reinstall the seaweed on it, so that it can start living again. And so we will not have any impact on that.
So interesting. So you got this stakeholder engagement that you do to sort of get that buy-in, but you're in multiple countries. Just quickly, is it easier in some countries to get transmission built, or what's the view on that?
Well, it's actually in Latin America, we have presence in Latin America. It's a bit easier, in particular because you have the possibility to go through areas where no one lives, or just a few people. And this is something that never happens in Italy, if you just consider it.
Interesting. And just last on that, the economics then. I mean, lastly, talk about some of the challenges of getting the projects done. Are you guys seeing some of the project costs going up because of inflation?
Definitely. If you look at the price of materials like copper, aluminum, steel, but all services in general, logistics, it's been, the increase has been so huge compared to 12 months ago or 18 months ago. We are mainly in a regulated business, which allow us to manage easily, but we have to take care of the cost-benefit analysis. In Italy and across Europe, we have cost-benefit analysis methodology, which has been approved and developed with the regulators, and we have to show that the cost-benefit analysis is positive. So this means that if you have an increase, a significant increase, you have to verify that it is positive. The other important point is to have a good partnership with the most important supplier.
Interesting. Ruth, in the Caribbean, I know some of the regulatory and policy challenges sort of stand in the way of getting some things done. How are you guys dealing with that in terms of balancing affordability, which I know is a big issue, but also the need to then accelerate investing in renewables? What are some of the regulatory challenges you all are facing in the Turks Caicos?
So currently we have a severe regulatory gap that would allow us to innovatively embrace the transition. We have, so what we have been doing as an organization, strategically working with the current administration to raise the level of awareness and urgency for the regulations to be addressed so that the transition could go at a pace that is needed, it needs to go at. So as an organization, we have also been what we call is regulatory optimization, looking at what we can do under the current regulations, and we have been we've been finding innovative ways in which to continue to do our part with the transition. We have a rooftop solar program that is also that came out of our utilization of the current framework. So we are pressing ahead with our solar rooftop program, and we also doing a lot of stakeholder engagement and education around the energy transition process, bringing the customers along, ensuring that we have the youth involved, that this is an inclusive process. So, just really building up the ecosystem for when the regulations are actually implemented. So it's a work in progress that we are experiencing in the Turks and Caicos Islands.
Yeah, seems similar to what you guys are doing, Giacomo. That stakeholder engagement and something, we at EEI in the States and elsewhere, it's very important to sort of focus on building that strong stakeholder engagement, right? I mean, and we talked about it when I was visiting with you as a big issue. Go ahead.
Just wanted to add in terms of managing our the affordability part of it. As an organization, we focus a lot on operational excellence and efficiency, and because of that focus, we have been able to offer our customers rate stability, and in the face of increasing costs, we've been able to offer rate stability to our customers.
Interesting. Ian, back to Australia. So talk a little bit about what do you see, what's the path forward? And I know you can't speak for the whole Australia and the whole Australian government, but from your perspective, your experience, you've run Ergon, one of the large utilities in Australia, you've been involved in regulatory stuff. What 2 or 3 things you think needs to happen in Australia that would sort of make a difference?
Yeah, look, I think there's been a big focus on supply, and there's nothing wrong with the market. And Australia is an energy market only. And I remember when I was Deputy Chair of the Energy Supply Association having arguments at that stage saying, I don't think the model in Australia is right for the future because there's so many players with conflicting interests. And we built this grid originally based on some good engineering principles and design, and as I said before, Monash came back from World War II, and that was the task he was given in Victoria, and he did it quite well. The purpose of the grid has changed. It's changed. So if something's changed so dramatically, you need to sit back and think about how it's designed. And that's what I was mentioning before from a systems perspective. Like the grid in Australia, the distribution networks are utilised less than 50%. It's not an issue that they can't host EVs at this stage. The grid's still quite dumb, okay? So as soon as it gets out of the substations, or the zone substations, there's not a lot of intelligence out there. But where is everyone putting the energy? On the edge of the grid. And they're putting batteries there. We haven't got quite as much penetration on electric vehicles, but because of the reform that's happening around the world, and we've got a new government that are going to push electric vehicles. So how do you integrate those into the grid and make them part of the solution? Nuclear is not going to be part of the solution. Hydro, As I said before, we're flat and dry, but we are putting pumped hydro for the Snowy scheme that's going in. Tasmania, the little island down the bottom, is typically 100% hydro. They're looking at a new link to Australia called Marinus Link. I was telling the story the other day how when we did have a carbon target or carbon tax of $23, the Tasmanian hydro company basically nearly ran their dams dry. And then the undersea link to the mainland failed, which was called Basslink. And they had to take load off the whole island. They sent diesel generators over there, a couple of hundred megs to keep it going. My argument is, everyone treats an electron in Australia the same, whereas it's not. A renewable electron from a solar installation is not the same value as a 24/7 hour electron coming from some other source, whether it's clean or it's not so clean, or whether it's coming from a battery, etc. I think the example is Tasmania when they ran it dry because they were getting paid for the carbon tax elements. Hydro in Australia should be all about security. Okay, it should be about the ramping on the solar, on the wind and the solar and those sorts of things. So we need to redesign the market so that it is sending the right signals, and we need to do that redesign on a well-planned system. So what do we want? We want affordable energy, we want cleaner energy, we want reliable energy, and we want to grow national domestic product. I find the conversation in Australia is so biased on the supply side, it becomes quite annoying, why aren't we talking about, why aren't we adapting to the energy resources that we've got in there? So why are we always talking about storing the energy? Why aren't we talking about changing the industrial processes and what we do with transport and all that sort of stuff? So there is a bit of a push now for a much broader discussion and plan on the energy transition. And I've always said, we need an orderly transition. And what did we get? We got chaos, as you said. Chaos is a process. We get to the edge of the cliff and we've got to try and keep people on and we drop things off and all that sort of stuff. So that's what we tend to do in Australia. We take it to the end of the cliff and all of a sudden, we need to plan more broadly. Perhaps the market is not going to resolve this. Perhaps the purpose of energy has changed. So that's what we need to do. We're unlocking more gas. So Victoria locked up its gas. There was no exploration. The Victorian government did that, and so did the South Australian government about 10 years ago. Again, we argued that was probably going to cause problems if you didn't have, what was a planned alternative. And they didn't have one. So what happened less than 2 years ago in silence? They opened up gas exploration in Victoria. What happened last week? We've got a gas shortage. So, I said something in LinkedIn the other day. This is the crisis that was 15 years in planning. So there will be more gas. There is more transmission links going in, but I would certainly like to see a whole of system view. And to do that, you need intelligence. You need to be able to see what the loads are doing. You need to be able to control those loads. You need to see what resources are there. And Australia does have a lot of resources. They need to be optimised. And I think we can get a cleaner outcome than we currently are achieving by doing that. There's been a lot of unforeseen consequences where the actual outcome from a carbon perspective is worse. So South Australia jumps up and down and says, we ran off solar today. And then they have minimum load issues. We've got to drop large-scale solar, we've got to drop large-scale winds. We've now got the ability to take the rooftop solars off. I was a director of a company called South Australian Power Networks. Do you know how we take the solar off? We high pot them. we raise the voltage, and it drops the inverters off. And that's fine because we can't see and we can't control. All the new rules say that they have to be smart inverters. So again, Lawrence, I'd say all those things are foreseeable. I don't know why people cannot see 10 years in the future what's going to happen. How do we plan for that? And there's some of the things we're doing in Australia.
Yeah.
No nuclear though.
No nuclear. Well, interesting. Why can't people see what's
We're going to plug our subs in. We're going to line up all these new subs. We're going to buy the nuclear subs from the USA and just plug them into the major cities.
That's a different panel. Okay. But anyway, so we'll come back and the last round, we'll want to talk a little bit about some practical things here, Giacomo. But Laszlo, just talk about the uncertainty around forecasting when you're developing, say, a new substation. You saw for example, we saw yesterday the award given to PSEG for all that work they did. Can you imagine today trying to build that kind of do that kind of infrastructure work for a company like PSEG, given some of the uncertainties you're seeing around resource? And I mean, just talk about the infrastructure demand for the utilities and how do they work with you guys to meet those things on schedule?
Do we need to go?
How do they do that?
I think we need to leave the.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, your attention please. An alarm has been activated. We are investigating the cause. Please remain calm and stand by near the speakers for further instructions.
Okay. Carry on.
Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, your attention please. An alarm has been activated. We are investigating the cause. Please remain calm and stand by near the speakers for further instructions.
Can you talk to the?
You want me to talk through it?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Well, I guess I can't remember what your question is, but I want to refer.
An alarm has been activated.
Oh, it's first.
We are investigating the cause. Please remain calm and stand by near the speakers for further instructions.
It's really quite. It's hard to talk over.
Come on,
But,
go on.
So, a couple of things. I'd say, Ian talked about chaos, and I'd say honestly, chaos is opportunity. You have to have that approach. You have to look at it that way. I remember once that sitting down, I was running an EPU, which is extended power operated nuclear plants for a customer, and I'd just been brought in to take over the project. And I was up in Wisconsin, and I was sitting in a bar and talking to the guy next to me, and he's a welder in the project. And I said, what do you do? What's going on? What do you think of the project? I mean, there's no better way to figure it out than talk to a craftsman. And he said, chaos is opportunity, right? And from the perspective of what's going on, and I'll get to your question, the ability to show our customers what you can do when there's COVID, what you can do when there is supply chain disruptions in terms of multi-project purchase agreements, forward purchasing of commodities, using the derivatives markets. There's lots of things, and the chaos gives us the opportunity to show, hey, this is what we can do. It's not just everything ceteris paribus. So I think the other thing when you said, how do you forecast or how do you see what's going to happen? For us in the United States, actually, there's something, we have the advantage, at least in one case, of being able to see the future. And I think it's, you look at Germany, right? Germany, all the power in the North Sea, all the wind power and all the demand in the south. And what does Tenant need? What do they have to do in order to be able to sustain this imbalance and be able to be successful? And the same thing's happening here, right? If Texas was a country, it would be the second largest producer of wind in the world, right? Most people don't even think about it, right? And so, and we look at what's happening there and the investments that are having to be made in the grid in terms of how do you manage the jobs? How do you bring craft to it? How do you do the permitting that you talked about, Giacomo? And so we have the ability in that case to be able to say, hey, there's an example, there's the future for what we're gonna have to do. In terms of resources and being able to supply it, again, the United States, if you look at most places when we do work in Asia, we bring craft from throughout the world. Our supply chain goes throughout the world. In the United States, our limiting factor, honestly, is people and equipment. And it's one of the countries that actually, in terms of the availability of people, it fluctuates, and there's a lot, I feel there's a lot more. You know, they talk about the Great Recession or the Great Quitting. What is it called? The Great Quitting, something like that. We didn't see it. We didn't see the Great Resignation in our company, right? We didn't see it in our craft. Actually, our losing craft, the attrition rates went down. And so we're looking, are we limited in terms of our supply? Yeah, there's, in terms of our resources, what we can do and how we forecast that. We're forecasting to grow, and it's not going to stop. A recession could impact it, yes, but in terms of what's needed for the infrastructure, we're not seeing it stop, and we're not gonna slow down in terms of what we're doing until we actually do see it. So, can we support all the work there is? No.
Yeah.
We have to have other partners just like us. We have customers who said we want to go with 2 companies or 3 companies for a scope of work, and we're going to work to use the same procedures. And that's some of the approaches that you have to take to be able to support that. You know, I think the interesting thing when COVID happened, we were working with new procedures and new PPE requirements in 2 weeks. And we reviewed everything we were doing with our customers, and we shared it with our competitors. And just being able to do that so fast alleviated a significant bump in terms of what we were doing.
We got about 10 minutes left for our last round, and I'll call this, we'll use the first minute for what we call the lightning round, so you get each 1.5 minutes, and I have this clock in my head. I will count 90 seconds and look at you with a frown on my face when you get to 90 seconds. But I want to start with you, Ruth. What lessons have you all learned on the Turks and Caicos, but just the Caribbean in general, given all that is going on? I mean, how do you try to design a much more resilient, a word that a lot of people like to use today, including myself? How do you design a more resilient system going forward, given everything that has happened, looking back and looking forward?
So in terms of the lessons learned from the last 24 months, one of the things we saw was we need to diversify. We need more energy diversification on our system, and as well as regionally. We need to add more renewable energy. We need the legislation in place. We need to do it with a sense of urgency because we are substantially exposed to climate risks as well. One of the things that we also learned is that we can't do it alone. We need partnerships. Quick example from the pandemic, when the pandemic hit, we were one of the first countries in the region to have access to the vaccine, and that allowed us to bounce back much quicker than most of our counterparts in the region, and that was because of our support that we got from the UK. So we need partnerships. We need, the theme for this conference is Power by Association. That is one of the lessons that was learned as well. And also keep the customers at the forefront of it all, keep the people at the forefront of the issues that are being discussed. Start with the customers in mind, start with the employees in mind, and do it collaboratively and inclusively.
Thanks. Giacomo, interconnection, transmission, we know is very important. But looking back, the last 24 months, looking forward the next maybe 12 months, let's not say 10 years to build a transmission line. what do you see going forward to avoid being in a situation of having a shortage of infrastructure capacity for getting all the wind and solar to move around Europe? What's one or two things you think needs to happen based on the lessons we've learned from the past?
Well, first of all, try to reduce the time to build. I mean, you know, the time between when you identify the need for a specific interconnection for a new project and when the project is actually ready. This can be done with a clear analysis of the different phases. So permitting is an important one, but also, you know, being sure that you can squeeze also the time for construction. And this means having, you know, a way to manage with the key suppliers what you can do in order to have them make their things in a shorter period of time. I mean, if you have modular projects that you have, you know, a clear, continuous update on your development phase and permitting phase with the suppliers, so that, you know, they can be ready to start operation and constructions in the right moment, that for sure will allow to have a more optimized process for that. And being flexible. If you have, you know, modular or standard applications and projects, you can then decide to switch from one project to the other according to changes that you see in the environment. I mean, and, you know, all the things that happens, and including maybe permitting. You can have a problem permitting for one project. You can switch also the procurement to another project. And that's only if you have a modularity.
Interesting. Ian, you mentioned systems approach. You mentioned bushfires, you mentioned flooding, you mentioned a lot of other challenges facing Australia. Now, just 60 seconds. Tell us about digital twin, because that's one of the things being used to address some of these issues from a systems perspective. Tell us about this fantastic project in Tasmania and what you are going to do over the next year regarding digital twin. You got 60 seconds.
Okay. Digital twin in Tassie, we've just stood it up. It's a joint venture between our company and Tas Networks, and basically going back to what I said before about resources and effectively utilising them, what digital twin's going to do is there'll be a digital twin created of the whole island of Tasmania, 68,000 square kilometres, all the vegetation, the forests, the farms, the industry, the built environment, the power infrastructure will be captured in the digital twin. We're putting out IoT sensors so we can sense across the network, so we can start to feel the end of the network, we can start to control, we can start to see, we can see how water's integrating with energy. So we're basically federating and democratising that significant data model. And people can host their data in it, and then you can start collaborating and having good business decisions. You know, will solar fit over here? What sort of capacity we've got there? What other resources? Hot water loads, those sorts of things. So it will be in my understanding, probably one of the most detailed spatial twins in the world, energised through IoT and data itself from many, many different sources.
Laszlo, just quickly, from your perspective, looking forward, what lessons have you all learned from the last 24 months? One or two things you would learn, and going forward you would apply to what you guys do with clients around the world?
Well, going back to what I said before, I think the transparency is critical with both suppliers and clients. Know the numbers, know the job, be able to identify the risks and realize that you can't control all the risks. Right? I haven't had a customer who hasn't said, "Yep, you've been impacted by COVID." They've all said that, all stepped up, and you have to be able to say, "This is what I see," and work together on the things that you'd never expected. I think that's it.
Well, I think the geopolitics and the geoeconomics facing this industry is going to just continue to evolve. And so I think to wrap up here, I'm going to ask each of you to tell us what excites you about the future, in spite of everything we've talked about, the negativities going on in Australia, the challenges in Europe, the issues facing the islands in the Caribbean. Optimism. Doris Kern-Goodwin talked about optimism. What gives you hope over about the next couple of years in front of us?
Well, we have so many things to do and so many efforts deployed by people in industry that for sure will find very interesting solutions. So I'm really excited to see how things will develop.
Ruth, what about you?
What excites me is what could be, what the end result would be, what would this transition look like, what would real collaboration look like, what would inclusiveness look like. And I think we're at a very pivotal moment to optimize all of those different areas. So I'm excited about what could be, and just having everyone at the table playing their part.
Ian, what about you?
Yeah, look, I think in the next 10 years, some of the technologies we talk about will start to come into play. I've always said the smart cities sort of environment's always been a convention sort of industry more than anything else. But I think you've got some real problems to solve out there, and there are significant resources, and there is some really good technology around, and some really smart people, and ways of solving these things. So how do I orchestrate resources? And I think that will become a key feature in the next 10 years.
Laszlo, what excites you?
I have two answers, and one is I'm not being cynical, or I think it's the F-150, right? It's going to change the world, and it is changing the world. And what's unique is about what happens in the United States with regard to the car market will drive change throughout. So when the most popular car in the world is electric, things are going to happen and things are going to speed up. And the other thing I'm really optimistic about is all the projects that we're doing that are associated with climate change that are financeable and happening. We're doing a hydrogen job at Delta in Utah, at wind power to hydrolysis or electrolysis to a combustion turbine to power going to LA, and it works. Financially, it works. And so that's really what excites me.
Well, I mean, with these four optimistic views about the world, I want to really thank you, especially of all of you, but Giacomo and Ruth and Ian for traveling to come here. I know you went through a lot to get all the vaccines and whatever else you had to do to get here, so thanks again. And Laszlo, thanks for being here, and thanks to Black & Veatch for your support at the EEI. And thanks to you for joining us. This was the last panel, and we were joking over dinner a few nights ago that we'll be here by ourselves talking, but in fact you guys decided to join us, and so we thank you for joining us and staying with us through the alarm, and I wish you all the best and hope to see you at next year's convention. Thank you. An applaud for the audience.